it is 1 o'clock, so I think we're going to start. So welcome today. Like I was saying earlier, for folks that were on here a little bit earlier, normally we would do this as a luncheon where folks would be able to come and meet some of the people that work at the community and taste some of the food and be able to, I always say, the look and touch and feel and smell and see if you like it. And with this COVID thing going on, we're going to have to do it like this a little bit. So we thought this would be a good idea to have just a speaker series of some speakers coming in talking about what's the current environment, some of the key topics to how do you make these decisions for assisted living and those types of things. And so this really is really not soliciting. This is really just kind of a educational session for you to join. So my name is James Kelly. I'm the Chief Sales and Marketing Officer for United Methodist Retirement Communities and Porter Hills. United Methodist Retirement Communities, which is located primarily in Chelsea, Michigan, so right outside of Ann Arbor, affiliated in 2019, March of 2019, with Porter Hills, which makes us now the second largest senior living provider in the state of Michigan. It also makes us the fourth largest not-for-profit organization in the state of Michigan. So what I like about the organization is that we're large enough that we have a lot of horsepower and understanding for how to deal with real life problems in retirement communities, but also we're still small enough that there's autonomy at each location, that there's a different look and feel. And really that's what we think is the most important part when you're looking at a community. I also use a term called consistency of character. Every time you visit with us, we hope that you have a good experience. And we try our best to make sure that that is happening every single time, whether you're a guest coming to visit a friend, or if you're looking at coming here to live here, or if you even work here. We hope that our hospitality really extends far beyond just trying to talk people into moving to our communities. So we're going to go to the next screen here for a second, and I'm going to walk you through some of the nuances of this program if you've never used it. On your bottom left, you'll see a little microphone, and it may say mute or unmute, and then also a video may say start video or stop video. You actually do not have access to those because we thought it would just be easier if we put the presentation up in the speakers. So don't worry about those buttons. They're not a big deal. The button that you may want to use, which our friend Robert used earlier, telling us about how much rain fell in Ada this morning, is the chat button. And so with that chat button, we're going to ask you to, even if you just clicked on it now, you would see some of the past conversations. And so I'm going to write on here, welcome to everyone. And so you can see that that's where we can write our questions. So as the presentation proceeds, if you have a topic that you want to talk about at that time, if you put that up there, I'll make sure that Tom and our vet hear it and see it, and we'll just kind of pop that up. If we think it's maybe a little bit better answered at the end, we'll do that as well. So that's where we are with that. So the purpose of this event really is just for you to get a better understanding for where we are with the market today. Why do people choose assisted living? How do you afford assisted living? And that leads me to my next point, which is, what is the difference between independent living, assisted living, and skilled nursing? So independent living means that you live on your own. You wake up in the morning, you make your own breakfast, take your own pills, you make your own bed, go out and go grocery shopping, things that just you did every day. As time progresses and some ailments, people may need a little bit of help. So in the back of our minds, we know that 7 out of 10 Americans require some type of long-term care throughout their life. So 7 out of 10 Americans are going to need either assisted living or skilled nursing, some type of care. Assisted living, on the broad strokes, means that you need a little bit of help, maybe a little bit of help bathing, dressing, personal hygiene. I have a friend that says if they can help us get ready in the morning, then I'm good for the day. And except for maybe some pills, and I can't cook, but you know, I can eat my meals by myself, and I can participate in the activities and those kinds of things. And then I may need somebody to help me with the shower. That's assisted living. It means you need just a little bit of care. Skilled nursing is 24-hour-a-day nursing care. So, you know, when you used to think of, oh, the nursing home, well, that is the nursing home. That's skilled nursing. And there may come a time where you need that. But there are different levels within our communities that we have of the independent living, assisted living, and skilled nursing. And today's conversation is really predicated upon how do you afford assisted living? Because assisted living is going to be a little bit more expensive. There's more care involved. And then skilled nursing is also a little more expensive. So we want to talk about how is this affordable? How do these prices work? How does this actually come together? So without further ado, I'm going to pass this over to Tom and Arvette.
Hi, James and Porter Hills, thanks very much for inviting us. I have the opportunity to introduce myself and my partner, Arvette Reed. As far as myself, my name's Tom West. I'm a 26-year veteran in the financial services industry, and I'm a partner in a national wealth management firm called Signature Estate and Investment Advisors. Even though we are working with you guys remotely, this is an opportunity, I think, for Porter Hills to bring in national experts for their speaker series. Pleasure again to be here. I am a published author of a handful of different articles in some financial services peer-reviewed magazines, specifically on how to pay for chronic care, on good, best decision-making, and so on. In 2018, I launched a particular company called LifeCare Affordability Plan that speaks specifically at how families can optimize decision-making with the confluence of financial issues and family issues and health issues. And we're looking forward to this presentation and being able to guide our audience in effective decision-making through wherever anybody's starting. Arvette? Mute. Your mute button.
There we go. I thought I was unmuted. Hi, sorry everybody. I'm Arvette Reed, and I joined the practice with Tom about 3 years ago, and we're really excited to be here today to talk to you a little bit about our perspective of how you can better prepare for some of the costs that might come down the road.
So when this presentation, how do you pay for assisted living, 5 important questions to ask, I think it's useful to just let the audience know this is probably a 10 to a 15-year-old presentation that has evolved to its current state. And part of the reason that we started with important questions to ask as compared to trying to break down the topic of how you pay for assisted living by presenting the audience with a bunch of answers, we want to recognize that people that are listening here today are coming from a pretty wide variety of different starting points. There are adult children on the line that are looking for additional information, maybe to help out a parent. We've got folks that are thinking ahead to the possibility of moving into an independent living community like what James was talking about, or maybe there's folks that are interested in getting some more information because their health needs are changing right now, and how do I come up with a plan to pay for additional assistance right now. Also, the financial circumstances that this audience has is pretty wide and varied too. What I want to emphasize in a lot of our comments is how do families and their professionals come together to make the most effective decisions that are specific to their own priorities and their own circumstance, while considering things like Porter Hills or any of the other different resources that are available in the Michigan area. Can you go to my next slide, please? So let's start talking about conversations that happen on a household level about care in general. And broadly speaking, these fall into a few different categories. On my left-hand side, making decisions about care. Is somebody able to make decisions about their own care? Does a family need to come together and collectively make some decisions? Are people willing to make those decisions? Are folks competent in terms of knowing what really is going on in terms of care needs? That's all one category. The second category, think of Porter Hills as an organization and all of the different faces that it has, that it's facing the community in terms of the different service offerings. Some of the issues that independent living, where you're really taking a look at moving in, where you're not needing any help, and you're thinking way down into the future about the possibility of future help. Alternatively, we have assisted living as part of our offering where somebody needs help right now. So the timing of care needs as a topic of conversation is another area. Healthcare events itself, dementia is an area that I've got a lot of background in, as well as Arvette, fall risk, mobility, et cetera. And then this last piece, care setting. A lot of families have conversations about, do we stay in our own home? Do we need to make changes to our existing home in order to accommodate care needs? Or do we think of maybe making a transition into a new home that might be a little bit more appropriate for current or future needs? If you go to the next slide, there is a parallel conversation that happens about finances. And think of family dynamics. You know, sometimes you're talking about a family member that has to make a bunch of financial decisions where they weren't the primary financial decision maker in previous chapters of their life, but now they're thrust into a new situation for the first time. Sometimes you've got children that weigh in terms of how decisions need to be made about money, but maybe they don't have all of the information, or maybe they're far away. These are things that families have to work out when they're considering how to pay for all of this. The cost of care itself is going to be something to consider. And you know, you probably, just like COVID, you probably are pretty aware in the audience that the stock market, what's going on in the bond market, what's going on in the real estate market is pretty chaotic right now. Uncertainty in the financial markets are things that sometimes impact good decision making. And then lastly, personal financial circumstances. You know, what does the cash flow look like in the particular household? What does, you know, any investment accounts, real estate, everybody's got a little bit different of a profile. And if you consider on my next slide, this makes for a really, really complicated set of decisions. And if you think the pieces on the top, which are really the healthcare focused parts of the conversation, and the things on the bottom, which are the finance types of conversations, there isn't a framework where these all easily come together. And a lot of times families sometimes find themselves reacting to one or two of these different items without necessarily taking account for all of them. And I think the fact that healthcare and financial decisions are traditionally understood separately makes for a particularly challenging situation for effective decision making.
So I'm going to take over now. And as Tom mentioned earlier, he is the financial side of the house. I am actually the healthcare person. So I worked in senior housing and healthcare for 15 years and then joined the finance firm about 3 years ago. I'm born and raised here outside of DC. My mother was a social worker and my father was a middle school principal. We didn't grow up talking finances at our dining room table. We didn't have a financial planner. So when I first joined the firm, I really wanted to get a better understanding about what it is that financial planners do. So this is kind of your typical financial planning timeline, right? They talk to you about your pre-retirement goals. Do you have children that you're planning for college? Are you looking to buy a vacation home? Your retirement goals, when you're done working, where do you want to live and what do you want to do, so they can help you determine how much money you need on a monthly or yearly basis. And then lastly, when you die, where do you want your money to go? Those are typically all planning conversations that you will have with a financial professional. But those of us in the healthcare industry, and I'm sure families as well, know that all the healthcare stuff happens after you retire. So all the plans that you made for your money, you have to stop and rethink them. The job of the money has changed. It's no longer to vacation or, you know, buy a second house or go visit the grandkids every month. It's now, how do I pay for housing? How do I pay for care, right? So it becomes more reactive. It can also be proactive in a way that some people are like, look, I know that as I age, I'm going to need more help. So I'm going to try to figure out how to plan for that healthcare stuff happens. It doesn't have to be reactive. So kudos to those that are actually on the phone today, because you're taking the step to look at it a little bit proactively. When the healthcare stuff happens, and I'll still refer to myself as a healthcare person, even though I'm in like a financial wrapper right now, but families typically come to us and they say, help me understand this maze. Can you explain what the difference between being home and being a community is? And what's the difference between a community and a facility? What is skilled versus not skilled care? Like Medicare, what do they cover and don't cover? Treatment versus comfort care. I spent 5 years working for hospice as well. So I get in a lot of conversations with people about palliative care versus hospice care. And then this is something James referenced at the beginning of the hour, independent versus assisted versus nursing. It is one big gray area to most families. So during my career, I actually worked in independent assisted nursing and hospice. So I understand the difference, and I understand how difficult it is for you as families to really grasp the difference, because it is very, very gray area. But here's the other thing. Families also assume that most of the care they need is going to be covered by Medicare or some kind of insurance, whether it's a supplemental insurance or whether you have a long-term care insurance policy or not. But there's this assumption that there's going to be money there to pay for care. So this is the aha moment. The healthcare professionals that you're coming to are actually the ones that have to deliver the bad financial news to you, right? Because you've fallen in that healthcare happens bucket. So this is what I call lost in translation. Two tribes, two languages. The financial professionals may not fully understand senior housing and healthcare. So some of you might already have financial professionals that you work with, or you might have a relative or somebody that helps you understand your finances and things like that. How much do they really understand what it's like to choose to live in Porter Hills or Chelsea, right? Like, do they understand the cost structure? They might have had a friend or family member, but they really don't understand the business. And then on the other side, you have the senior housing and healthcare professionals that you're now coming to in the middle of this healthcare stuff happens, or as you try to plan proactively, you're going to this new group of professionals and they may not fully understand finances, right? They might know what a pension and Social Security and stocks and bonds are, but they're not really in depth and be able to give you advice on your particular portfolio. So families are then caught in the middle. You're caught between a financial professional that is going to tell you about the money, and then there's the healthcare professional that's going to talk to you about care. And as Tom said, those don't align. So when that happens, it makes decision-making very, very difficult, right? One, you already don't know how long someone's going to live. So if you're working with a financial professional, they're like, okay, tell me how much money you're going to need and for how long, right? We don't really know that. And then the next question is, I don't really know how much help they're going to need. So you're working with the senior housing and healthcare professionals who are like, okay, independent versus assisted versus nursing, but you're not quite sure what they're going to need in the future. And then will they be safe? Let's not forget we're in the middle of a pandemic with COVID-19, right? So now you add on the complexity of, I have them at home, are they safe? If I look at a community, are they going to be safe? And there's lots of things that these communities are doing to make sure that their staff and residents are safe, but it's also part of the challenge in making a decision right now. When you have these questions and you don't know the answers, families tend to procrastinate until there's more or better information that presents itself, right? So I'm not going to make a decision yet. I'm just going to wait and hope that I'll get an answer. So we're going to do what we call 5 questions. There are 5 questions that we want you to start thinking about right now that'll help you better get your head around how you make the decision, where you want to move, when you want to move, and things like that. So the first one is, do you know how much long-term care is actually going to cost? This is a study, it was done a couple of years ago, but it's still very accurate, that in general, through a survey, 31% of people underestimate the cost of an assisted living, and 36 actually overestimate. Now let me talk a little bit about what that means. If you're underestimating the cost, then you're going to go into it and all of a sudden you're going to hit a panic like, oh my gosh, do I have enough money? Am I going to be able to stay here? Is my loved one going to be able to stay here? Because the planning that you did was actually under the actual amount. Then if you look at the people that overestimate, they say, oh, it's too expensive. The danger in saying it's too expensive is then you actually don't get the help that you need because you automatically say it's too expensive, I can't afford it. So it's really important not to try to estimate the cost, but to get the actual cost. I encourage you to reach out to the teams, get their price sheets, really understand how the structure works, so you don't fall in this category of someone who underestimates and not prepared, or someone who overestimates and then actually doesn't get the help that you need. The second question is, are you aware of what Medicare and Medicaid will cover? So let's start with Medicare. So Medicare is the benefit that you can get from the government, right? So these are the things that are covered by Medicare by service. So you can see your physician, the hospital, home health, skilled nursing facility if you're under rehab. As James said earlier, a nursing home, a skilled nursing facility, a rehab, it's all the same building, right? But if Medicare is paying for it, it's typically called rehab, but it's still the same physical place. Hospice, other benefits. But what you notice on here, there is no coverage for Medicare for long-term care spending. So Medicare does not pay for assisted living. They do not pay for room and board. They do not pay for any of the down payments on independent or anything like that. So let's make that clear that it is an out-of-pocket expense for room and board when it comes to assisted living. Now, we've had people say, okay, well, I'm just going to look at Medicaid. I'm just going to briefly explain to you what Medicaid is to make sure that you understand what that means. So Medicaid is a government issued financial supplement, right? So it's a financial aid, and it's run state by state. So the state of Michigan's Medicaid process and procedures may be slightly different than the state of Wyoming, for example. When you are looking at Medicaid, there are 3 things that require eligibility. Medical, so you have to have a medical need for Medicaid, how much income you have coming in on a monthly basis, be it Social Security or pension, and then how much resource do you have? Do you have a house? Do you have investments? What do you have? All 3 of those criteria have to be met in order to become Medicaid eligible. So there are some people who will say, I've talked to an attorney and I am going to apply for Medicaid without really understanding what you can get from that. So with Medicaid, you can get somebody to come help in the house for some hours of the day, but Medicaid most likely is not going to cover a 24-hour period. So you still need a plan with your family, your friends, your church, whoever, to cover the hours that Medicaid is not going to cover. If you were going to look at a nursing home level of care, the communities do have Medicaid beds, so that's an option. But you also have to consider that Medicaid is not necessarily for assisted living. So Medicaid itself has parameters that you really need to understand before defaulting to that is going to be your plan. Okay? Third question. Do you have a plan to pay for the most hopeful outcome? Now, that is a question that you have probably not been asked. So based on your current circumstance, whether you have a diagnosis of something right now or not, whether you're just getting, older and you're like, I need to start planning, what are you most hopeful for? When we ask people that, we usually get a, I'm not sure, nobody's ever asked about that. So I encourage you to really stop and think, what is it that you're most hopeful for? And this is how you do it. You need to recalibrate your goals based on what's important right now. So 10 years ago, your most hopeful might have been A, but now you're 10 years older, maybe you have a diagnosis, your spouse has a diagnosis. Based on current circumstance, what are you most hopeful for? Is it to stay together? Is it to downsize? Is it to get the best care that you could possibly get? Whatever it is, you need to be able to articulate that. But when you're doing that, focus on what the outcome is. Are you looking for a cure? Are you looking to stabilize function? Or are you looking to prepare for a comfortable and dignified death? You have to be realistic about what your goals are based on your healthcare circumstance. Then, once you do that, then you go to the most fearful. So let's talk a little bit about that. When you have a healthcare diagnosis or something comes up, most people are telling you what you have to do and what you can't do, right? That's why it's important to start with most hopeful, because then it allows you to really dig deep to put your priorities together. Then you start listening to what are you most fearful of.
I think when we talk a little bit about hope and fear, we spend a lot of time as professionals sort of considering each of those different concepts when we're trying to talk with families and trying specifically to get them to a place where they recognize what their circumstances are and they have the best chance at being able to drive the best healthcare outcomes. And we've definitely found that speaking about how folks truly imagine the things that they're most hopeful for. I want to stay in my home as long as possible. I want to stay with my spouse as long as possible. I want to be able to not be a burden on my children, to be able to self-direct my own life to the greatest degree possible, maintain independence, and so on. Those are things that you really need to focus on first, because here, when we're talking about the part of the question, do you have a plan to pay for the thing that you're most fearful of? A lot of times the psychology of fear keeps people from moving forward in a decision-making process. When people think about getting older or needing help, and certainly in the time of COVID-19, you know, I think that sometimes it's understandable that when people are fearful, they can decide that making no choice at all sometimes feels like the safe choice. What I have on this slide right now for consideration of the audience is sometimes procrastinating and being fearful of what comes next can sometimes have an unintended side effect of having options that could be available taken away. Sometimes people will wait until there's a change in health or a change in function or a change in cognitive ability, like with dementia, before they even start the planning process. And one of the things that I'll ask James in a second to comment on, I want the audience to be aware of is with not thinking forward about outcomes that you're most hopeful for and waiting until there's a circumstance that you're afraid of to prompt you to action. Some different opportunities, perhaps like moving into an independent living, might be taken away because your health might not qualify for the best option that could have been available were you to plan a little bit earlier. And James, maybe you have an idea or two about this concept of options being taken away.
Sure. So for those of you that don't know me, I've been working with seniors for my entire career, which is about 25 years. And my father worked with seniors his entire career, which was about 50 years. And I would do presentations all across the country when I worked as a consultant. And I would ask people, if you had an emergency right now and you had to go to assisted living or skilled nursing, how many people know where they would go? And you get some hands here and there, but not a ton. And I think even if you really did know where you wanted to go, so I'll give you an example, which is Porter Hills Village or Chelsea Retirement Community. If you needed assisted living or skilled nursing right away, I can't tell you that we'd always be able to take you. We're a very popular place to go for care. And what really breaks my heart the most is that when someone does really need care, we don't have room for them. So I started using this understanding, this statement of understanding of what we do about 10 years ago, and I still use it because I think it's relevant. When you think about your car, driving your car, you have tires on your car. Tires are very expensive, and tires aren't really fun, so nobody really does any research about tires. So the interesting thing is that when you get a flat tire, you go to the mechanic, and the mechanic says, okay, you really need tires. It's really bad. And so you don't know anything about tires. So you ask the mechanic, and you don't know whether he's telling you that these tires for $1,200 are better than these tires for $1,000. But the truth is that we sell a product, we offer a product that most people don't really know anything about. And so you want to be able to do the research about it before you need it. So it's one of those things is, you know, I'm not saying go out there and do research about tires, but I am saying go out there and do research about retirement communities, because you need to have an understanding of, if something does happen, where do you go? What's the process? How much does it cost? All of those types of things. So thanks, Tom, for letting me say that.
Sure. And one of the things that I missed in my introduction of myself, I sit on the board of a large faith-based nonprofit retirement community in the Washington, D.C. area. And when I was initially considering this slide, one of the things that's got to be true of Porter Hills as well is this concept of, you know, a wait list. When people, you know, are put the name on a list to have an opportunity to move in at a future time when a unit becomes available. One of the things that I really want to underscore for the audience, you don't want to wait for a change in health to start the process to get on the wait list. Remember that just because you're on the wait list doesn't mean that you have the option to move in right there. You've got to go through the particular queue, wait for a particular unit to come available, and there's a whole financial process that goes along with that. I'd really implore you to make sure any of the different options that you've got, make sure that actions that you take give you as many choices for as long as possible, all the way through the rest of your life. Next slide, please. So, final question. do you have a new plan to pay for your adjusted retirement goals and your adjusted legacy goals? Because remember, as Arvette said in a previous slide, when healthcare stuff happens in retirement, sometimes it takes away from the plans that you've made for non-health related stuff, for maybe some very personal or family related goals. And on my next slide, I just want you to remember the impact of the financials cost of long-term care tends to be initially thought right around that individual that needs help. You know, there might be some physical and or cognitive issues that tends to impact one family member, and the costs associated with them can sometimes be too narrowly understood as just around that person. It's also important, though, for the audience to recognize that the financial impact of these costs of care sometimes can influence much more than just that individual. The financial implications can impact many family members. And some of the things that we're doing with our clients right now in the time of COVID, I'll share with you that priorities for some of our clients are changing. You know, sometimes you've got adult children that are in some financial hardship because they've lost a job, or they might be sick with the disease itself, or they might have childcare issues because kids aren't going back to school. And the way that families, particularly, you know, older seniors that are looking to support future generations, those priorities sometimes change. So you want to consider how all of those different priorities that don't involve health at all could be impacted by the possibility of going out of pocket for healthcare. Next slide, please.
Yeah, and before we move on to this one, as an adult daughter, I too understand that a lot of times from a client's perspective, we have clients, but from a personal perspective is the adult children getting together to figure out who can contribute to help mom or dad, right? So those are real conversations every day that a lot of families are having. So, all right. So we've given you some background on some questions that we think you need to start processing and coming up with the answers to. Because once you understand those questions and the answers, it'll help you better prepare for how you actually look forward. So where do you start? The first thing you need to do is make a plan, right? You have to come up with a plan that's written down, that's shared with loved ones, and that's understandable. We're not just talking about going to a lawyer and getting all your legal documents done. It's bigger than just that. And why it has to be shared with loved ones is because when something happens, everybody's jumping in with their opinion, right? So the more that you share your hopes and your fears and what your desires are above and beyond what's written in a legal document, the better the family's going to be able to come together and support whatever decision needs to be made at any given time, right? And the understandable without translation also goes back to the legal documents. People think plan legal documents. Well, we're not pulling out legal documents and reading them and trying to figure it out, right? That's complicated. Understanding without translation, it's very clear. Like, these are the places I really want. This is what I'm most hopeful for. This is with what I'm willing to concede and what I'm not. Those types of conversations. Because the reality is, making a plan is a choice. If you don't make a plan is going to be made for you. So remember, I worked in the industry for 15 years. One of those jobs was doing admissions at a nursing home. I saw what was happening with the hospital discharge process, right? So some of you may have experience either with yourself or your loved ones. When you go to the hospital for some emergency of some sort, you're admitted, and then all of a sudden they give you a list and they go, okay, you're being discharged tomorrow, choose, right? So they've already made the plan for you. You're going to this place unless you have another plan. So it's really important to not put your head in the sand, to look around, start getting information, as James said, so that when the decision point comes, you actually have some knowledge to help guide you in the right direction. So here, just to reiterate again, the simple questions you start with: what am I most hopeful for, and what am I most fearful of? And then you also need to surround yourself with a well-balanced team. No decision should be in isolation of just legal, just clinical, and just financial. So a lot of people will say, I already have my legal documents done. We did them 10 years ago. we're not sure that those legal documents actually are accurate for the current circumstance now. So take a little bit about that. For example, you wrote it 10 years ago, but now one person is in early stages of Alzheimer's. Is your legal document now circular, right? The other would be clinical. You have to get the healthcare input as well as your financial input. All three should come together when you're making a decision. We call it the three-legged stool. So it doesn't have to mean you have a financial professional. We are financial professionals, but we also have clients whose adult children or their brothers are the financial professionals in their lives for a given amount of time. That's fine too. Just make sure you're taking all the input and putting it into one. And then have a plan. This happens to be the plan that we have called the LifeCare Affordability Plan. But what I wanted to highlight is we're looking at healthcare and financial. So if you are going to a financial professional, you need to make sure that any planning you do around this healthcare stuff happens or about moving into a community includes the healthcare costs as well. It shouldn't be just the short term, this is how I feel now. You need to incorporate the cost down the line so that you have a full plan, right? So that it incorporates what's personal to you. And that's why we have, remember at the beginning of the presentation when Tom did the slide where the financial, the healthcare don't align, you need them to align as best as possible when you're doing a real plan. So when you go through this planning process and you make sure that you're dealing with legal, financial, and healthcare, what we have heard from families that we guide through this process is that before they're overwhelmed, concerned, they really don't understand how all this is going to fit together. Remember, there's information coming from all over the place. And then after we help them put together a plan that includes all the aspects, they feel more confident and guided and prepared. So I'm going to share a little personal story with you, and this is why I love this slide. So remember, 15 years in senior housing and healthcare, I pretty much thought I knew everything there was to know about senior housing and healthcare. I joined the firm with Tom as the healthcare person in the firm. 2 months later, my mother gets sick. So about a year and a half of my mother getting sick, declining, and eventually dying, I was in the middle of the personal healthcare soup. And even though I thought I knew everything there was to do about healthcare, I didn't. I had to pull in other experts. Fortunately, I had joined the firm, and Tom and the team walked me through this process, the stuff that we do now. So when we talked to my mom, my dad, and my brother and I about what she was most hopeful for, we knew she wanted to stay home. She was most fearful of going to a nursing home. She declined to the point where the only option left was to go to a nursing home because we had looked at legal, financial, and clinical. So when she had to go to the nursing home, because we had talked about it and we had planned for it, we felt prepared as a family that that was the time to do so. And she too agreed it was time. So it wasn't like it was happening to her. She was part of the plan. So regardless of how you put this plan together, I encourage you to really look at it from all different angles and use the resources that you have here with James and his team to fill in some of the holes. So we're just going to reiterate here. If you think about the original timeline I gave you with the financial planning, most of your financial conversations are all the planning, where you're going to live, what's it going to look like, where am I going to put my money. Then once again, all the healthcare stuff happens, and then we've added in COVID. There's the COVID ball coming in there. And when that happens, everything has to be reset. So the goal of a planning process is to take all the different pieces of the puzzle, be it healthcare, be it financial, be it legal, and put it together on the other side so that you have a plan that you're comfortable with and that everybody in the family understands and everybody can march to the same beat.
So some of my closing comments on this particular slide, I'll share with you that this slide is my favorite slide of any of the presentations that we give because it suggests 2 or 3 things. The first thing that I wanted to call attention to is for everybody in the audience to recognize that priorities change. As time goes by, the things that are most important to you at a particular stage in your life, they change. And knowing about housing and healthcare transitions and the experience that we've had both personally and professionally, I think this slide really underscores the need to recognize when those changes happen. We have a lot of conversations with clients where, we're dealing with a couple, and the couple comes to the table and says, listen, no matter what, the most important thing is for us to stay at home and to make no changes at all. And then something happens and maybe somebody starts needing some additional assistance. And then there's a new most important thing. The most important thing might be we want to stay together. And even though our needs might be a little bit different, it's more important for us to stay together than it is for us to stay at home. And then time goes on and somebody might need a little bit more help. And the most important thing is to make sure that the person that I love and I care about is taken care of as best possible, and so on and so on. Sometimes when we as humans are having trouble in transitions, a lot of times it's holding on to things that previously were the most important things without being comfortable transitioning into sort of the new reality that we're in. And I'm pleased to be talking to Chelsea Retirement Porter Hills in the middle of COVID, because if there was ever a period of time, certainly in my adulthood, where there's so much uncertainty and there's a recognition that things that we thought were not going to be changing, well, pretty much the whole world is upside down right now. I think that being able to look at this slide and to recognize that sometimes in order to put the puzzle together, where it's incorporating your circumstances, your new reality as it relates to healthcare, and what your priorities are, it involves some give and take. It involves some letting go of things that didn't previously, seemed a lot more immovable. So I'd encourage everybody coming out of this to think really carefully about all of the different resources that Porter Hills and Chelsea Retirement can offer. One of the things that James had talked to Arvette and I beforehand is knowing that they go through a pretty in-depth discovery process. And I have a soft spot in my heart for any faith-based nonprofit that does this kind of retirement work, because I truly believe that the outcomes, the life outcomes holistically for the seniors that they serve are really top of mind. Recognizing that you have the opportunity to work with an organization that intuitively knows how to balance these two is going to be particularly important. So I'd encourage you to go back with the team, pull from them the information that might be most germane to you, the costs and so on, and be very deliberate in integrating that likelihood for shifting priorities with new circumstances down the road in the process that Arvette and I had talked about. So that's the close of my prepared comments with Arvette. I want to be able to say, first off, thank you for the invitation to present. I'm going to transition this back to James and let him sort of navigate any questions and answers. We should have plenty of time to go through any questions that people have.
Sure. So oddly enough, we did get a couple questions right towards the end there that I'll read out now, and we'll go from there. And I think both of them are probably better for me, honestly. So I am understanding that it would be to my benefit to at least be on a waiting list to go to CRC, which is Chelsea Retirement Community in Chelsea. So if I need to be in assisted living nursing care, I would be a possible priority. So what's difficult is we do not necessarily take a waiting list for skilled nursing. We will take a waiting list for assisted living. And so that when there are openings that we can have conversations. What's more difficult is when the situations happen very quickly. Like if you were to fall and break a hip and you have to go to the hospital and you have a 3-day stay and you'd have to find somewhere to go for skilled, I think that's where you do more of your research to figure out where you want to go. I know this sounds like a sales pitch, but if you are part of one of the Porter Hills communities or one of the UMRC communities, United Methodist Retirement communities, you'd have priority access over some other folks. So that would be a benefit of living in a community as well. So I hope that helped answer that question. The next question is, will the pamphlet that was shown be available to us to view? And yes, that is entirely my fault. In the beginning, just like Moses, I should have said that we are recording this and we're going to share it with everyone. So you'll be getting that from either Allie or Julie, who is your contacts for either the Grand Rapids side or the Chelsea Dexter side, and this will be sent out to you. There's another question here. If finances will not fully support my healthcare issues, does the state of Michigan look at what the extended family can financially do? This is a really interesting question. The state of Michigan will look at your finances specifically when it comes to Medicaid. And Medicaid for the state of Michigan is a $2,500 allowance that you have within your savings. And then they would look at your income and they look at your other assets and that kind of thing before you'd qualify for Medicaid. But they do not hold your family accountable for that. It does brush a topic that I wanted to talk about, and that is—
Hey, James, one thing about, what I wanted to say about that is I think it's really important as an adult daughter, and we've seen this happen a lot. There are lots of circumstances where children can contribute to care for parents. But it's really important to go through a full planning session about what that means. So it could be that one kid is willing to say, I can give X amount per month for perpetuity. It could be another kid could say, I can contribute to mom's independent one-time payment fee. So it's not necessarily, I understand there's a whole conversation about the state of Michigan and Medicaid and what does that mean for kids, but I wanted everybody else to understand that you need to have a family meeting. And that's one of the things we do with clients is I just ask. I said, I need to know if anybody in the family is going to contribute so that we can model that. Yes or no. There's no shame, right? And just get it out on the table. Sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off, but.
Oh, that was great. Thank you very much. That was great. The other thing that I wanted to touch on is a little bit of kind of what Tom talked about earlier, which is we are a not-for-profit organization. No one person or group of persons benefit financially from the running of this organization. And so because we run this with a mission and traditionally a faith-based mission, that we want to make sure that people that live beyond their means that are within our community also are taken care of. And so whether you enter into the community in independent living or assisted living, there are benevolent care programs that will make sure that you don't ever have to leave this organization and leave this care if you deplete your assets due to no fault of your own. And that really is a very big difference when you're talking about certain organizations. And so looking at what does it take to qualify for benevolent care is also another pretty key feature for your search.
And James, one thing that I think is a nice echo on the other side of that. You know, I'm coming to this presentation, a pretty strong proponent of the nonprofit model. Just think a little bit about another element of that question, which is, what happens when a well-intentioned family member accidentally signs up to be financially responsible for a senior, maybe with organizations that might not be quite as forthright in terms of what liability might be extended beyond the family. I'd very much give the audience the strong advice that if, as adult children, you're planning on contributing to the care of a parent, and that's an intentional thing. Think of what our vet said. Make sure that you're getting very good legal counsel, particularly if somebody is in a financial circumstance where Medicaid might be planned for, that you spend through assets like James talked about. That whole conversation right there should be a really good motivation to at least consider a path like a retirement community that has a benevolent care fund that, again, in the event that people run out of resources, there's a backstop where people don't have to find another place to live or another place to get taken care of.
Sure. And Tom, honestly, one of the big questions we get about benevolent care is, where does that money come from? And I'll tell you that ever since I've been with this organization now for 2.5 years, one of the first things I did when I started working was I tease and say it's garnished my wages. I give a donation to the foundation that is specifically dedicated to benevolent care. And every single paycheck that I get, a portion of that paycheck goes into the benevolent care fund, because it's something that we as employees feel so proud to be able to take care of folks. And we see people that some people have money, some people don't have money. And why should they be treated any differently? Because they're in need of care. So I don't see any other questions coming up. So if anybody has them, please feel free to pass it on. The one thing I did want to, I wrote down a question myself, so I guess I'll ask it myself. And that is, why do prices for assisted living vary so much from place to place? And so one of the things I want to tell you is you're on a presentation right now with Chelsea Retirement Community in Chelsea, Michigan, and Porter Hills Village in Grand Rapids. And I can tell you that their assisted living pricing models are different. Mm-hmm. So it's not necessarily right or wrong, it's just different. And part of it is, as I said, we're governed by a board of representatives, and the board sets the tone for each organization, which was UMRC and Porter Hills separately, and that's how they felt it was best to serve the public. So as time goes on, will that change? It could, but there's different variables that go with that. So I will tell you though, with our communities, your basic, what we call their room rate, if you go to other places, the apartment that you live in, that is included with your care. So if you go to other organizations, they may say, oh, okay, well, your room rate is $1,500 a month. Right. And then if you need this, if you need medications, well, that's $20 a day. If you want ice cream in the middle of the night, that's $5 a day. And so you really have to look at what's best for your financial portfolio when you look for a community to see how that fits what you're looking for. I think the other part is how do you choose a community? And really, I would say that it's emotional and rational. So the rational part would be, well, they give me this, they charge this is the best deal, just like at Walmart, when you look at the little sign or Meijer and it says, this is the cost per unit, right? So it doesn't work that way though, because you may not like the way the community feels. You may not just, it doesn't feel like home when you're walking there. And so these are some of the factors that you look at. We got another question.
That's really important too, because what I would say is that you shouldn't be picking a community based on finances, right? Like let the finances be discussion after you look at the community. Mm-hmm. So go back to the slide where I said most people think they can't afford it, and so they take it off the table. Where the reality is, one of these communities might be a perfect fit for you as an individual in your interest and the culture. And if you don't explore that, if you take it off the table because you think you can't afford it, you actually might be eliminating the best fit for you. So I suggest you to still just start talking to them and not eliminate it just because you think you can't afford it.
Agreed. So here's another question that I think would be great for Tom and Arvette. How do you plan financially for two people in independent living and then one of them needs nursing care? Are there two separate costs?
It's a great question. So I'm going to make a few assumptions with how to answer that. The first one is I'm going to assume that we're talking about in a retirement community setup, something like Porter Hills or Chelsea Retirement, which are type C LifeCare contracts, where if an individual needs additional assistance, there's typically a surcharge above and beyond the independent living for how that works. And each of the different parts of the community inside of Porter Hills or Chelsea have different rate schedules and whatnot. How do you plan? Well, I think that the first thing to think about is you start off with what are the scenarios, again, that you're most hopeful for. If I move into this community or any community really, what is the thing that I'm most hopeful for? And think about whether or not there are opportunities. Let's say, for example, that you want to stay together no matter what. And even if that means taking a look at changing units, are there options, for example, in assisted living or skilled nursing where couples can stay together and continue to cohabitate? That's going to vary by location, by facility, and so on. I think that how do you plan financially? Well, I'll give you, my first response is sort of a pitch down the middle, which is you should model it out. You should see if one spouse is staying in assisted or in independent living at such and such a month, and the other one needs additional help at a nursing level where there's an increased cost, you should have a plan to know where the money is going to be coming from in the event that you have to go deeper out of pocket. I think that the important part about planning is recognizing, for example, in your portfolio, are you going to be working with cash, or are you going to be pulling from retirement accounts and so on? The best nuance of that, Ms. Hollick, for the question is when people are moving into assisted living or nursing, there's one important thing that changes from a tax standpoint, that people are able to deduct the cost of assisted living or nursing in particular, which changes the tax profile of the household. That's important for planning, and that's going to be an element that a good plan tries to account for if people need additional healthcare expenses to be able to support their quality of living. Make sure that one, you know what the costs are going to be. Two, you make a projection so you know where the money is going to come from. And then three, don't forget the taxes, because if you're paying a significant amount out of pocket in the kinds of communities that we've got hosting this event, your tax circumstances are going to be different.
Right, and let me just throw in, just from a financial 101, coming again from the healthcare person. Traditionally, the financial professionals will say, hire me and pay me a percentage of your assets, right? So some of you may already have a relationship where you're paying a professional to manage your assets. There's also the opportunity to do flat rate planning with a financial professional. So if you don't have somebody that you're already working with to help you put all these different scenarios together, you should try to find a financial professional that will do the flat rate plan for you, where you can do all this analysis without any long-term commitment. So I just wanted to make sure you understood, just because you don't have a financial planner today doesn't mean that you can't get this kind of assistance in doing the pricing analysis.
So Arvette, you know, you tease yourself about being the healthcare person that does the finance. It's about to get worse. Here comes this marketing guy talking about finances. So you know, you'd have to consult your financial professionals, as Tom and Arvette are talking about, but also legally there is an ability to do a separation of assets. And I don't know anything other than it basically, and definitely in the state of Michigan, they do look at this, that there's an ability that one spouse does not bankrupt the other spouse. And so, you know, that's another one to look into if you are concerned. But in skilled nursing, you know, there would still be a spend down to the Medicaid portion, but it would not bankrupt the other spouse, which is actually a really nice thing that Michigan does.
Yeah, and I think whenever you're talking about intentionally planning with the spousal impoverishment protections, which is part of what you're talking about cleaving the assets and whatnot, it's really important that you explore all of the different options of paying out of pocket, of family support, of a community that offers benevolent care and so on, before making that decision. Because regardless of what state you're in, once you go down that path of separating assets and doing Medicaid planning by state, the most important message is you can't change your mind. Like, you've got to be sure. And there is always a percentage of families that we talk to that have prematurely gone down this particular Medicaid planning path, where there might have been other options that could have been affordable but weren't thoroughly vetted. So for anybody anywhere in the country, make sure that you fully explore all options, because that Medicaid path is typically an irrevocable one.
Yep.
That's a very, very good point. So we are at 1:59, and I want to be conscious of everyone's time. And the last question is perfect for us as an ending question. And it is, when we are done listening to this wonderful presentation, thank you, would it also be available to have my children listen to it at a later date? This would be a great way of opening up this conversation with my children. And I will be the first to say congratulations for taking a step to something that is not always fun to do.
Mm-hmm.
I said earlier in the presentation, we normally do these luncheons, and I tell people, you know, when you came out today, why did you come? And they said, well, you sent me an invitation first. Second, you know, I thought I would just see what it's like. And I said, No one wakes up and goes on a Thursday morning, I'm going to go look at a retirement community.
Right.
No one does it. It's one of those things, you know, you have to do that research. So we will be sending you a link to the presentation. We'll put it on YouTube, and we'll send you a link in an email that you'll be able to click on it and share it with your family or whoever it may be. Also on the screen here is the contact for East Side and West Side, again, Grand Rapids or the Ann Arbor area. And I just want to say thank you so much to Tom and Arvette and everyone that attended. We had over 40 people come. I was just so happy and blessed to have these people come and us to be able to be a resource for folks. So I want to thank everybody very much, and I just hope everybody has a very good day.
Thank you.